The officer didn't even look at the menu board. He walked straight past the line, past the other travelers juggling carry-ons and coffee cups, and stopped directly behind a woman sitting alone at a small table near the window. She had a salad in front of her, untouched. A leather briefcase leaned against the chair leg. She was reading something on her phone, and she didn't look up. Not right away, because there was no reason to. She was just a woman eating lunch at an airport restaurant, doing what thousands of people do every single day in every airport in this country. But Officer Dale Merritt had already decided she wasn't just a woman eating lunch. That was the beginning of it. That was the moment the whole thing started. Not with a confrontation, not with raised voices, but with a man in a uniform walking towards someone who had done absolutely nothing wrong, carrying an assumption he hadn't bothered to question. The Richmond International Airport on a Tuesday afternoon in March is not a quiet place. Flights cycle in and out of the gates every few minutes. The terminal food court fills up fast. Business travelers, families with strollers, military personnel moving between assignments, tourists checking their phones for gate changes. The noise is constant, rolling wheels, overhead announcements, the hiss of espresso machines. Nobody pays much attention to anyone else. That's just how airports are. Dr. Lorena Vásquez-Osei had been coming through this airport for 9 years. She knew which security line moved fastest, which coffee counter opened earliest, and which gate had an outlet near a seat where you could actually stretch your legs. She had the kind of familiarity with a place that comes from traveling for work. Real work, not leisure, week after week, month after month. She was a trauma surgeon. She worked out of Richmond General, but consulted regularly at a veterans' health facility in Norfolk, which meant she spent more time in airports and on regional jets than most people spend in their own cars. On this particular Tuesday, she had landed at 12:47 in the afternoon, coming back from a 3-day conference in Atlanta where she'd presented research on blast injury protocols, work she'd developed over 15 years. First as a military surgeon deployed twice overseas, then as a civilian specialist working with the VA system. She was tired in the specific way that conference travel makes you tired, not from doing nothing, but from doing everything at once for 3 straight days. She had one more meeting in the afternoon, and then she was going home. She ordered a salad because it was fast. She sat near the window because the light was better. She was reading a message from her daughter when Officer Merritt appeared beside her table. She looked up. He didn't introduce himself. He said, "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." Lorena Vásquez-Osei looked at him for a moment. She set her phone down on the table, face up. She said, "I'm sorry?" "There's been a report," Merritt said. He had a way of speaking that was just clipped enough to sound official, without actually saying anything. "I need you to come with me so we can get this sorted out." "A report about what?" she asked. Her voice was even. People at nearby tables hadn't looked up yet. "Ma'am, I'd prefer to discuss this away from." "I'm in the middle of lunch," she said. "I just landed. I haven't gone anywhere. I haven't done anything." "What report?" Merritt shifted his weight. He was a broad man, mid-50s, with the kind of posture that was meant to communicate authority. He glanced around. Not at her, just around, the way people do when they want to remind you that they have an audience and you don't. "There was a disturbance reported near the sea gates, a woman matching your description." Lorena looked at him. She let that sit for a second. "A woman matching my description," she repeated. "That's correct." "What was the description?" He paused. "Just a beat. Just enough." "Ma'am, I'd like to ask you to come with me voluntarily, and if I don't come voluntarily, then I'll need to detain you for questioning." The man at the table directly behind hers, a heavy-set white man in a polo shirt, noise-cancelling headphones around his neck, had turned to watch. A young woman a few tables over had her phone out, not filming yet, just holding it. The way people hold their phones when they're not sure yet whether to film. Lorena Vásquez-Osei was 51 years old. She had been in situations that made this one look like nothing. She had worked in field hospitals where the walls shook. She had sat across from generals and argued about triage protocols and won. She had delivered bad news to families in waiting rooms more times than she could count. She was not a woman who startled easily. She also knew exactly what was happening. "I'm going to ask you one more time," she said quietly. "What is the description in the report?" Merritt's jaw tightened. "A black female, medium height, business attire. That's the description." He said nothing. "That's the entire description." She wasn't asking. She was naming what was happening out loud, clearly, in a tone that was not angry, just precise. "There are approximately 40 women in this food court right now. You walked past every one of them and came directly to me. Ma'am, I'm Dr. Lorena Vásquez-Osei. I am a trauma surgeon and a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Medical Corps. I landed here 40 minutes ago from Atlanta. I have not been near the sea gates. I have not caused a disturbance. I am eating lunch." She looked at him steadily. "Now, am I being detained?" The question landed differently than Merritt expected. You could see it, the slight recalibration behind his eyes, the moment where the script he'd been running shifted and he had to find his footing again. "I'm asking you to cooperate. Am I being detained?" she said again. Same tone, same steadiness, not louder, just clearer. "I have the authority." "Officer," she folded her hands on the table. "I know what authority you have. I'm asking you to tell me specifically whether I am being detained or whether I am free to finish my lunch." The food court had gone quieter around them, in that subtle way that spaces go quiet when something is happening. Not silent. The espresso machine still hissed. The overhead announcements still ran. But the ambient noise of human conversation had dropped. People were watching now. The woman with the phone had started recording. Merritt said, "I think it would be in your best interest, Merritt." The voice came from somewhere to the left. A booth near the wall, close enough to have heard everything, far enough that the table hadn't been visible from where Lorena was sitting. The voice was measured, not loud, the kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud. A man stood up from the booth. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with close-cropped grey at his temples and the particular bearing that doesn't come from trying to stand straight, but from decades of simply being expected to. He was in civilian clothes, dark trousers, a white dress shirt, no tie, no uniform. But there was something about the way he moved across the restaurant floor that made 3 different people unconsciously sit up straighter without knowing why they'd done it. He stopped a few feet from Merritt and looked at him with an expression that wasn't angry. It was something quieter than anger. Quieter, and much worse. "I've been sitting right there," Brigadier General Howard Caswell said. "For the last 22 minutes. Merritt blinked. "Sir, I watched you walk into this restaurant," Caswell said. "I watched you walk past 6 other tables. I watched you walk past the woman at the counter, the woman by the door, and the woman at the corner table, all of whom fit the same general description you just gave. And I watched you stop here." He let a beat pass. "I heard everything." Merritt's face had gone through several changes in the span of a few seconds. Recognition arrived last. It settled over him like something cold. Howard Caswell was not a name that most civilians would recognize. But in certain circles, in the specific, interlocking world of military brass and federal law enforcement coordination and airport security contracting, the name meant something. He had spent 31 years in the Army, the last 8 in senior command positions. He currently served as a senior advisor to the Department of Homeland Security's Infrastructure Security Division, which included, among other things, oversight of federally contracted security operations at 14 major transportation hubs in the eastern United States. Richmond International Airport was one of them. The color had left Merritt's face in a way that wasn't particularly dignified. "General," he started. "Don't," Caswell said. "Just the one word. Don't explain it to me. I was here. I don't need it explained." He turned to Lorena Vásquez-Osei. His expression changed, not dramatically, but shifted into something warmer. "Dr. Vásquez-Osei, I'm sorry this happened to you." He extended his hand, Howard Caswell. She shook it. "I know who you are, General." A pause. "We were both at the VA symposium in Norfolk 2 years ago. You were the keynote." Something moved across his face that was close to a smile. "You asked the hard question about budget allocation for BLAST TBI research." "Someone had to. You were right," he said simply. Then he looked back at Merritt. The warmth left his expression as cleanly as a light switching off. "Don't move," he said to the officer. "I'm making a call." What happened in the following hours was not dramatic in the way that confrontations on television are dramatic. There were no shouting matches. Nobody got tackled. The drama was quieter and more procedural, and for that reason, more final. Caswell made 2 phone calls from the restaurant. The first was to the Director of Airport Security Operations, a man named Philip Garner, who picked up on the second ring because Howard Caswell's calls always got answered on the second ring. The second call was to the security firm's regional supervisor, whose company held the federal contract for this airport. That conversation lasted 9 minutes. Garner arrived at the restaurant at 4. Dale Merritt was escorted out of the food court by his own supervisor. He did not make eye contact with anyone as he left. The young woman who'd been recording lowered her phone as he passed, and then raised it again to watch him go. The formal review began the following week. What it uncovered was not a first offense. It was, in fact, the 4th documented incident involving Officer Merritt and a similar pattern of stops. 3 previous complaints had been filed. 2 had been quietly settled. 1 had been dismissed without review. The security firm's internal documentation, when it was finally pulled and examined, showed that a supervisor had signed off on each of the dismissals without requesting body camera footage. That supervisor was also placed under review. Merritt was terminated 26 days after the incident. The security firm received a notice of contract, non-renewal, from the Federal Oversight Office. The regional supervisor resigned before the renewal decision was formally issued. None of that happened in the restaurant. In the restaurant, after Caswell made his calls and Garner arrived, there was mostly paperwork and careful, clipped language, and the gradual dispersal of bystanders back to their lunches. Lorena Vásquez-Osei sat at her table and answered Garner's questions with the same even precision she'd used with Merritt. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't demand anything, she didn't need to. When it was over, General Caswell stopped at her table again on his way out. "You never got to eat your salad," he said. She looked at the plate. The lettuce had wilted slightly at the edges. "I think I've lost the appetite for this one." He nodded. Then quietly, "You handled that exactly right." "I've had practice," she said, and there was something in the way she said it. Not bitter exactly, but weighted, that said more than the words did. She caught her afternoon meeting with 4 minutes to spare. She didn't tell her colleague what had happened at the airport. She told her daughter that evening, over the phone, and her daughter's response. A long silence, followed by a sharp exhale, followed by the word again, said everything about what it means to navigate this country in a particular body with a particular face, regardless of what you've earned, or built, or sacrificed. She filed her own formal complaint that night. 3 pages, single-spaced, precise and thorough. She'd learned a long time ago that documentation mattered. That the difference between something being on record and something being forgotten was often just whether someone chose to write it down. She wrote it down. Here is what people keep getting wrong about stories like this one. They want the lesson to be about the general. They want the takeaway to be that the right person happened to be in the right place, that justice was delivered because someone with enough stars on his record stood up and made it happen. That's a comforting story. It has a clean shape to it. But that's not the real lesson. The real lesson is what happened before General Caswell stood up. It's a woman sitting alone at a table, with every reason to be tired, and every reason to want the situation to simply go away, choosing not to let it go away. Choosing to be precise and calm and absolutely clear about what was happening and why it was wrong. Choosing to say his name back to him. Choosing to ask the question twice. Dr. Lorena Vásquez-Osei didn't need someone to rescue her. She had handled it. Caswell's presence accelerated the consequences. It made the accountability happen faster and go further. But she had already named what it was. She had already refused to be moved from her own table, from her own lunch, from her own dignity. There are thousands of women like her in this country. Women who are doctors, lawyers, engineers, veterans, professors, officers. Women who have given decades of service and expertise to institutions that still, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, send someone across a restaurant floor to ask them to prove they belong. Women who know every legal phrase, every procedural right, every careful word to use, because they've had to learn them, because not knowing those words has costs that people outside of that experience don't carry the same way. Dale Merritt lost his job 26 days after he approached that table. The contract his employer held was not renewed. Accountability arrived, slower than it should have, but it arrived. But here is the part that should stay with you. Accountability arrived because a woman didn't flinch, because she documented, because she was precise, because she said, "Am I being detained twice, clearly, on record, in front of witnesses, and made it impossible for anyone to pretend afterward that nothing had happened." General Caswell put it on the record. She put herself on the record first. That matters. It matters more than the ending. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, if it made you think about something you hadn't thought about before, Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And ask yourself the question that nobody in that restaurant thought to ask. Before Caswell stood up, how many times does this happen when there is no general in the next booth? How many times does it happen and nobody films it, nobody files anything, nobody puts it on record? How many times does the salad just sit there, going cold, and the woman pays for it and leaves and nothing changes? That's the story underneath this story, and it's worth talking about.